Greetings, Duke family. I'm so glad you all are with us. My name is John Light. I'm Trinity 2002. And on behalf of all of us from Duke Charlotte, I want to welcome you to the 8th annual and first virtual Blue Devil Dinner. We have wanted to have Judy Woodruff as our guest of honor for several years now. And so I am so glad that you're able to be with us tonight. Couple of quick housekeeping items. I want to remind everyone to please keep their tablets and computers on mute with the video off. I want to thank all of you who submitted such great questions in advance. And this evening, you are able to ask questions, which our host will cue by using the chat feature within Zoom. Lastly, we hope to have this event recorded and posted to the university's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And so keep your eyes and ears open for that, because you can share the YouTube replay with any of your friends and family who are not able to join us tonight. Now, for those of you who may be new to Charlotte or new to Duke Charlotte, we have something special in store for you tonight. Our annual Blue Devil Dinner has quickly become our marquee annual alumni event, where we have a chance to welcome national and global leaders with a Duke connection. Past speakers have included Duke football coach David Cutcliffe, Nobel laureate Robert Lefkowitz, chairman of the Board of Trustees Emeritus and well-known businessman and philanthropist David Rubenstein, President Richard Broadhead. We have had business consultant and famous mom, Janet Hill, interviewed, of course, by her son, Grant Hill. We've had Motown the musical director, Charles Randolph Wright, and Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon. And I am absolutely delighted that the esteemed Judy Woodruff is joining us tonight to help us keep such a strong tradition going. And now, Judy, I can't remember if I mentioned this a moment ago, but in the 7 prior Blue Devil dinners, our record registration was for Coach David Cutcliffe. We had 268 people sign up to join us for Coach Cut. And that happened to be the first time that Duke went to a bowl game since the earth cooled. We had 268 signed up. As of 5 o'clock this evening, we had 278 people signed up to join us tonight. And many of those 278 are couples and families planning to watch together. So we are giving Coach Cut a run for his money. Lastly, when I was thinking about making some brief comments here this evening, I thought about downloading a picture of the Duke Chapel, maybe the Rubenstein archives, having something Duke themed in my background. But I thought to myself, hey, you guys are all watching from home, so you might as well see me doing this from home. And for those of you who watch the PBS NewsHour, you can look at the bookshelves behind me and clearly see that I am less well-read than Judy. Don't worry. Help is on the way. There is a company in Maryland near Washington, D.C. called Wonderbook. And in this day and age of virtual video meetings, where bookshelves have taken on the greatest importance in a generation, Wonderbook has a service called Books by the Foot. And they can help me appear well-read in the genre of my choosing, whether or not I actually am. But in all seriousness, Judy, I did recently download Ron Chernow's biography of Ulysses S. Grant after seeing it hanging out over your right shoulder for the past 11 months. And so that did inspire me, and I look forward to it. But at this point, I want to invite all of you all to sit back and relax. I want to invite you to pick up the beverage of your choice as I now pass it over to the president of the Duke Endowment, Rhett Mabry, to formally introduce Judy and lead our conversation this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. I'm not even going to try to top your wonderful sense of humor there. And I just want to say thank you to you for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. I am honored, and we are all honored tonight to be with Judy Woodruff, who is anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, and more importantly, certainly for this group, a Duke University graduate. During her amazing career as a broadcast journalist, Judy has covered politics and other news at NBC, CNN, and PBS. In 2013, she and the late Gwen Ifill were named the first two women to co-anchor a national news broadcast. And after Ms. Ifill's untimely death, Judy was named sole anchor. Judy was born in Tulsa. She grew up as a self-described Army brat, moving to Germany as a little girl and living all over the United States on various Army bases. She first studied at Meredith College in Raleigh and then transferred to Duke for her last 2 years of college, where she majored in political science. She served on the university's Board of Trustees from 1985 to 1997 and has numerous honors, including a Duke Distinguished Alumni Award. Judy lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Al Hunt. They have 3 children, Jeffrey, Benjamin, and Lauren. Welcome again, Judy. It is a thrill. It truly is a thrill to have you with us here tonight. And I know everyone out there in Zoom, all 285 of us, are as excited as I am. In fact, as John said, many of the folks in the audience have already submitted questions, and we'll be using several of those tonight. So thank you for that. That was extremely helpful. And toward the end, as John said, if you'll ask questions via the chat feature, we'll try to get as many of those as we can and make sure we try to ask those as well. So Judy, thank you, and it's great to have you. I'm sure you had another busy day. In fact, I know you had a busy morning with the Duke Endowment Board.
Well, I have to put in a great word for Rhett Mabry, who, as you all know, president of the Duke Endowment. I salute him as the leader of the endowment. So tables are turned. He gets to ask me questions. Usually I get to ask him questions. So this is definitely a tables turn, but I am so honored to be with all of you, and especially to be here answering Rhett's questions.
Well, thank you. I suspect your questions were a lot tougher to answer than maybe some that I'll ask tonight, but it really is a treat. So thank you so much. I thought what we do is eventually get in. I know a lot of folks want to hear about the political environment and the state of our country, but I thought we might start first with how you ended up at Duke and hear about your experience there. As I said, you were a political science major, so why Poli-Sci? And did you take any journalism classes as well, or?
Well, it's a kind of a winding road, Rhett, and I will condense it. I graduated from high school. I'll go ahead and say the year. It was 1964. Neither one of my parents had gone to college. I was getting advice from teachers about where to apply to college, what to do, what to study. I had no idea. There really weren't very many women role models. I knew I wanted a career. My mother hadn't finished 10th grade. So her main goal for me was, you're going to get an education and you're going to figure out what you want to do. So I had her pushing me, and bless her soul. She was the one I give so much credit to for anything I've been able to do in my life. But I had Duke on the mind when I looked at schools, but Duke put me on the waiting list. And fortunately, a couple of other schools accepted me, and one of them was Emeritus, the wonderful women's college in Raleigh, still is in Raleigh, as everybody knows. And they offered me a scholarship, and I went to Emeritus planning to major in math. I had done well in math in high school. I liked math. I liked numbers. I had a teacher in high school who said that he thought I could be an insurance actuary. So I kind of had this thing in the back of my mind, but I also had Duke in the back of my mind. And I went off to Meredith. And again, to make a long story short, I had an instructor in my freshman year who taught calculus. And he essentially thought women shouldn't be taking advanced math. And all the women in the class pretty much got the message that we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The good news is I was also taking a course in political science my freshman year at Emeritus, a woman I've actually stayed in touch with, Carolyn Murray Happer, who knew that I wanted to go to Duke. And she just, frankly, opened up new doors to me because she made political science and politics seem like the most interesting thing in the world. I hadn't thought about it as a career, as something to study, but that's what got me interested. And small story, her father had been, or was at that time, the football coach at Duke. His name was Bill Murray. Some of you may remember him. I think he coached another couple of years, but that was purely coincidental. So when she found out I was interested in Duke, she pushed me. But yes, Rhett, I went to Duke, and by that time I had changed my major to political science. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I had some amazing professors, David Palitz, Alan Kornberg, and others, too many to name, who opened my eyes and frankly, made me realize how much more I needed to learn.
Wow, I'm glad that Duke corrected their initial mistake.
But no journalism. I mean, you asked me, did I study journalism? I didn't even think about journalism until I came back to Duke my it was the fall of my senior year.
Right.
And I had a conversation with Alan Kornberg, who was my professor. And I told him that all the guidance I had gotten in Washington as an intern from my congressman that summer was don't go back to Washington because women are not going to be treated seriously, and you're not going to get a job that you're going to make a contribution. You'll be a gopher.
Right.
So I shared this with him, and he said, well, he sort of thought, he said, did you ever think about covering politics? Did you ever think about journalism? And it was based on that conversation, and of course a few others, that led me to think about reporting. But it happened at the last minute.
Wow, that's interesting. Favorite memories from Duke? Do you have any? What stands out from your 2 years there?
So many wonderful friends. My girlfriends I stay in touch with to this day. We have a group of us. We email, share texts all the time. But I would say the most vivid memory was the sit-in on the quad my senior year. It was the spring of 1968. It was, as everybody knows, it was Vietnam. But the triggering event was that the non-academic employees were on strike for higher salary. And the students rose up and said, this is not going to stand with us, and organized. I was not I can't say I was one of the activist leaders. I wasn't somebody who was out marching in the streets over Vietnam. I was still trying to figure out Vietnam at that time. But the specific issue that triggered the sit-in, absolutely I was for. And so there we were studying for exams, sitting out on the main quad, spring of my senior year. I remember that like it was yesterday.
I'm sure that probably piqued your interest as well in going into politics as well. So you graduate from Duke, you go to Atlanta. I think you went to work for an ABC affiliate. How did that happen? How did you end up in Atlanta, and what was that experience like?
Well, I made this very careful calculation that my parents, as you mentioned, grew up as an Army brat. My father was stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is Augusta. So that's where my parents were. And since I had decided on journalism so late, spring of my senior year, I decided I would apply for a job, any job that I could get in television journalism. And it was through the back door. Somebody said, why didn't you think about newspapers? And I said, well, to get a job at a newspaper, you've got to show them your clips. I should have written for the Chronicle. I hadn't done any of those things. I worked my way onto the pub board, the publications board at the very last minute, but I hadn't really done journalism. And so I said, maybe in television, they'll hire me to, empty the trash. I interviewed with 3 news directors in Atlanta, CBS, NBC, and ABC affiliate. The ABC news director was the only one who, they had the worst facility. I went to this building that was falling down because ABC wasn't doing very well then. But the great part of that story, Rhett, is that we had this interview. I told him, why I wanted to go into, into journalism. And he hired me. And as I stood up to leave, he hired me to be the newsroom secretary. And I got up to leave and he said, and I said, thank you so much, Mr. Conover. And he said, besides, how could I not hire somebody with legs like yours? So I would love to tell you that I had some really clever, smart comeback. And the truth is I didn't. I mean, I was so humiliated and crushed, frankly, because I thought what they had told me, what I'd learned about math and what I had learned about Washington, women aren't welcome. Hello, it's everywhere. But I did take that job. I went to work right out of Duke. 2 weeks after I graduated, I became the newsroom secretary. I cleaned the film because that's what we use. I answered the phone, I emptied the trash, and then, started applying for jobs.
And I hope that type of environment I hope it did not persist, but it may have. I hate that.
It did, but to stay with it, women you just had to be tough and you had to frankly ignore it.
Well, I note from conversations with you that, and I think I'm right about this, but please correct me, that your big break might have been Jimmy Carter's rise, I guess, prior to the 1976 election. Am I right about that? Was that or was that? Yeah.
For sure. I was hired after a year and a half of being the newsroom secretary, and don't tell anybody, but I did the weekend weather for about 6 months. It was like Cinderella. I was a secretary Monday through Friday, and I came in on Sunday nights at 11 o'clock to do the weekend weather because the news director said, you either do this or you'll never get a job in television. But fortunately, another news director hired me to cover politics, to cover the Georgia state legislature. I had no experience. I was all of 23 years old. So don't tell me, I have no idea what he saw in me other than that I pestered him to death and just kept saying, I really want to report. And by the way, I majored in political science at Duke, which I'm sure made a big difference. But guess who was running for governor that year? He was a former peanut farmer, former state senator. His name was Jimmy Carter. I was the reporter. I covered him as governor for 4 years. And then he started running for president. And in fact, he had it in mind 2 years before. And when I applied for a job at NBC, in 1975, and that's another story, Rhett, they looked at Jimmy Carter and said, he's not going anywhere. We'll have you cover something else. And I kept saying to them, but you need to watch him. They're really serious. Of course, he was elected, and I pestered them again. And they, to keep me quiet, they sent me to Washington to be the third man on the totem pole at the White House. I was covering nights and weekends. But you're right, that was the big break. It was the peanut farmer from Georgia.
And did you, following him that closely, were you optimistic? I guess that's a fair question. Were you hopeful about his trajectory, or were you as surprised as others?
I saw in the people around him a seriousness. Of course, I didn't have anything to compare it with because it was my first presidential campaign. But what I saw them doing with this sort of microscopic analysis of the country. I mean, Hamilton Jordan, the late Hamilton Jordan, Jody Powell, the people who were around Jimmy Carter and Carter himself, and then a cast of others, were really pretty smart tacticians, strategists, and they put together a plan. They dissected the country. They had him going everywhere. They had him in Iowa where the caucuses were when other candidates were not paying attention. They found people who not just donated money, but donated their plane to him or donated, whatever he needed. He was a winning candidate, and he had figured out the country in a way that, the other candidates that year, Scoop Jackson, Birch Bayh, Mo Udall were the other Democrats running. And of course, they were running against Gerald Ford, who had ascended to the presidency after Richard Nixon. Right. But Carter's message of, we need a country as full of love as are the American people was a message, as corny as it may sound right now, it was a message that resonated after Watergate and frankly, after Vietnam. People felt burned by Washington, and Carter was this fresh-faced, toothy smile out of the South who had a reputation as somebody who had beaten back segregation. That's another complicated story. But he was the right man at the right time. Of course, as we all know from history, he didn't get reelected.
Right.
So they clearly made mistakes. But I could see there was something special. I can't tell you that I knew he was going to win.
So you now have gone to Washington, D.C., and we've already touched on some of the challenges by being a pioneer among female journalists. Were there people in the business, mentors, that helped further your development, and who might they have been?
Absolutely. There were wonderful people along the way, from the professors I've mentioned, who I tried to stay in touch with when I could. That news director who hired me as a reporter at the CBS station, Bob Brennan, somebody, who just sort of plucked me out of nowhere because he had lost two reporters at the same time. His woman reporter, who was leaving to have a second child, and he had an opening he didn't say this, but it was an opening for a woman, and his reporter covering the state legislature had a health issue. They both left at the same time, and he hired me. He remained a very close friend and has remained and advisor to me. Over the years, others in Atlanta, but certainly at NBC, Jack Chancellor, John Chancellor, Tom Brokaw remains a friend and a counselor, career counselor to me. And then, of course, in the last 30 years of my professional life, Jim Lehrer, the late Jim Lehrer, who we lost a year ago in January, and Robin McNeil. And I would like to tell you that there were women who were just supportive and wonderful. The late Cassie Mackin, some of you may remember, covered Washington for NBC. Barbara Walters at points in my career. But there were always, frankly, fewer women than there were men, and the people in charge, the bosses, were men. And I've been very blessed to have people who've been incredibly supportive of my career.
Well, I'm sure they saw the talent that was in you. We touched on Jimmy Carter and your experience there, but since then, you've had a chance to interview numerous presidents. I hope this is a okay question. The ones that you liked, or the ones that stood out the most, who were those and why?
Well, I'm going to give you the politician's answer, but it's absolutely true, Rhett. They're all fascinating. They're all interesting. I've interviewed every president. I interviewed Gerald Ford after he left office, but I interviewed every president from Jimmy Carter up until Barack Obama. I did not interview President Trump. I did attend luncheons that he hosted for television news anchors. I went to 4 or 5 of those, actually 6 or 7, but never had an interview with him. But I would say the ones that stood out the most, certainly Jimmy Carter, because he was the first for me, someone I watched grow from the state leader that he was into a national leader, and then just to watch him do things well, but also to watch the mistakes. Right. And I have to say, Ronald Reagan, who utterly charming, could spin a story like nothing you've ever heard. Watching him make decisions that not everybody agreed with, but doing it in a way that I think people understood what he was trying to do. He certainly came across as a leader. And then I have to say Barack Obama, because he was history. He was who he was, not just the charisma, but the intellect. But I feel like when I say this, they're all going to, I'm shortchanging the others. I mean, there was something to be, I'd love to tell you stories about George H.W. Bush, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. But I would say, I have to say Jimmy Carter, for me, special because he's the reason I came to Washington. President Trump, was part of history.
Right. So it sounds like many of us are complicated beings and have incredible assets and challenges and things they work on as well. So what you referenced earlier, the role of your mother in your life, pushing you to be educated. Is is that the source of your drive and your work ethic? Because I'll have to, just being honest, I'm amazed at your work. I'm amazed at that you're on this show every day and you prepare for that and you make time for the Duke Endowment and probably other boards as well. And just what is that drive? What's the source of that?
Well, it's 2 espressos every morning. Number one, I love really strong coffee. But seriously, I love what I do, Rhett. I mean, I just feel so lucky. I feel I have the dream job. And I have had, I mean, as long as I've been in journalism, I mean, the idea that you can basically get up every morning and work on a story, work on an issue, a subject that matters to people, that you are responsible for helping them understand whatever it is. I mean, I happen to love politics because I'm fascinated about politicians, by how they make decisions, by how they get where they are, what makes them tick, what makes a great leader, how do great leaders fail, what is it in a character, in a personality that leads someone to make bad decisions, to have a failure of character, even if earlier in their life they were someone who was just on an absolute, trajectory upward. What happens in someone's life? All that fascinates me. Not to mention the issues we get to cover. I mean, from over the years, just from American, from domestic issues like taxes and I don't know, you name it, healthcare, to of course the pandemic. I just feel even the terrible stories that we cover, we are so privileged to be able to ask questions and to help people understand what's going on. Just tonight, I was interviewing a virologist, a professor at Yale, explaining how worried they are about these new variants. I mean, there's no one day that's like any other day. And so that's what drives me. And absolutely, I give credit to my mother. I can hear her voice in my ear. Diapers and dishes can wait. And they did. I didn't have my first child of the 3 until I was 34. So they waited, marriage waited. But it's also having a wonderful, supportive husband. I'm going to give a shout out to Al Hunt, my husband. We've been married for 40 years and he's been incredibly supportive. And I think, so all of that, but also I love everything that I do. I've been so blessed. It sounds like a commercial, but to be able to go to Duke. I mean, I read about Duke as a high school student and thought that's where I want to go. And I did eventually get there. I just feel very, very lucky. And I'm sure I've worked hard too, no question about it. But I've worked because I love it.
Well, you brought up some of the contemporary issues of today. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about today's environment, the future of news reporting. How has covering the news changed in this era of fake news and social media?
It's changed like day and night. Rhett, you and I have talked about this. It's changed everything. I mean, when I started in journalism, there were 3 networks and there were a couple of major national newspapers and a whole lot of local newspapers. Today, there are thousands fewer newspapers, tens of thousands fewer journalists, working journalists, because of what's happened to the landscape. Social media, Facebook, Google, Twitter, the rest of it, I mean, have essentially taken over the kind of journalism that we do. Sure, there's still the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, but most other newspapers are struggling mightily to stay afloat and to stay alive. And so many journalists, as I said, have lost their jobs. So there's the economic picture, which is just, in my estimation, devastation. Right. It's killed me to watch great institutions collapse in city after city, or be a shadow of what they were. But the other thing that's changed is that the deadlines, as you know, are constant. It used to be you did a report for the morning, it was either the morning paper or the evening paper, or there was the Today Show. When I was at NBC, there was the Today Show, and there was the NBC Nightly News, and that was it. Today, it's every second.
Right.
The story breaks, you need to know it. You follow Twitter, you have to follow Twitter. You're constantly watching whatever news feed you pay attention to. And it keeps us all on our toes. I don't know how some of my colleagues do what they do. People ask me what I read, and I just say never enough. I can't possibly read enough to keep up with what's going on. I have to, make sure that people are telling me about this article or that or something that happened, because there's just no way to follow it all. And what I hope through all this is that journalists are staying grounded and focused on what our role is, which is, of course, to cover the news, bring you the facts, you make up your mind. But that's changed a lot. And Rhett, you may want to talk about that. I mean, opinion is now a much bigger piece of what we do than it used to. And, Americans love that, but it's also, I think it's eaten into the kind of good journalism we need as Americans.
I agree. I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you feel journalism contributes to this polarization? I think you described some of it now.
No question. It contributes because we now have many more ways to express our views. And even if it's not a labeled as an opinion, the fact that journalists can now weigh in by emphasizing something or repeating something or tweeting about something, it's given journalists, shall we say, more platforms, many more platforms to play on, if you will. So besides the day job that we have, reporting, say if our beat is the White House or the Capitol or the Pentagon, or in my case, anchoring a national newscast, I now have the option. In fact, I'm expected to tweet about and write about other whatever is happening that's important. I do not share my opinion, but so many of my colleagues are very comfortable doing that. And I think it's possible to both report and try to keep, just to dish out some of what you think is important.
Right.
But the more time you spend on Twitter, the more time you spend on Facebook, Instagram, etc., the more you are sharing, what your priorities are. And I think ultimately that comes across. And I still draw a line. I think that reporters, we ought to stay behind that line.
Right. And meanwhile, fewer and fewer people trust the media today. And I guess I'd love your sense of, are we going to be able to repair this mistrust, or are we just spiraling to the bottom? What's your projection, or what do you believe? How do you think this sorts out?
I think I worry a lot about it. I think we see what the American people's estimation of journalists now is. The polls show some huge, depends on the poll you look at, but huge percentage of Americans now say they think the press is biased, not to be trusted, that we make things up. A lot of that, I think, is the product of what we've seen over the last 4 years with the former president saying we are enemies of the American people. I do think that whatever you may think of President Trump and his policy, I do think that those statements calling reporters fake news, I think help do damage to the press. I'm not saying the press hasn't contributed to that. Certainly we make mistakes. And when we do, by the way, we need to correct them right away. We need to say we've made a mistake. But to say that we are enemies of the American people, to say that we are fake as an industry, as an enterprise, I think that's helped do a lot of damage. And I think it's going to take a while to undo it. And I don't mean to point the finger just at the former president. I think there are a lot of factors here. But I worry about it because I believe a democracy depends on a free press, a press that people generally have confidence in, generally can trust. They feel they're getting information that is a common source for all of us, that we can point to that and say, here's what the budget deficit is. here's what happened between Russia and the United States in that election. Here's what happened in our election, period, in 2020. Here's what happened. And here are the facts. And we can disagree on what they mean, but we at least agree on the facts. And that's what I worry now, has been eroded, and there's a lot of damage that's been done. And, you know, I think it's going to be up to the younger generation of journalists to help, and younger generation of Americans,
Right.
you know, to figure out, you know, how we get through this.
It's depressing if you let it be. We have several questions from the audience. And let me shift gears to that. Let me see. How has the DC climate changed in the first few weeks of the Biden administration? Have you seen anything noticeable, tangible?
Well, what I hear people say, people I talk to, and I try to talk to people in both political parties, is that they feel, even Republicans will say that they feel that there's just a lighter atmosphere. It's maybe a better way to say it. It feels more normal. It feels like the kind of routine that would happen in a new administration, where you have a meeting with senators from the other party, as President Biden did last night. That you don't have, you know, the angry language thrown around as much. It's not to say there's not disagreement. There's plenty of disagreement. We don't know what's going to happen on this COVID relief or immigration or any of these other environment, any of these other enormously important issues. But there's a sense now that the two sides can sit down and talk to each other. But having said that, there's also a recognition, as we were just discussing, Rhett, that 75 million Americans voted for President Trump, for former President Trump. And many of those people, if not most of them, have a very suspicious view of Washington and everything that goes on here. And so I think there's a sobering kind of overhang that still lives in this city, not to mention the worry about the pandemic, the economy, which is all kind of a given right now. There's a lot of worry about all of that.
The reactions to which have all been so polarized. It's been fascinating. Another question is, you're part of a thoughtful news program. What is the future of news programs like yours when so much of the country wants to gravitate toward hearing whatever their side is? You know, they want to be, I guess, confirmational information. What's the future of a reasonable news broadcast?
Well, I'm happy to report that our audience has not only hung in there, that it's grown over the last 5 years. People are looking for news that they can trust, they can count on. I mean, I'm basing this on what people write to me, tweet to me, email to me, and to my many wonderful colleagues. I am so fortunate to work with a fabulous team of journalists, and what all of us hear from people is not just attaboy, you know, keep it up. It's, we count on you. We are, you know, we so desperately count on you to report the facts, to report the truth. Please, you know, keep it up. Don't stop doing what you're doing. So we get a great vote of confidence from people. And like I said, our audience numbers have held up, not just held up, but have grown. And so we feel very good about that. Having said that, Rhett, you're right. The country's very polarized. As long as there's Fox and MSNBC and all the social media out there pulling people in those directions, and for many people, that's all they want to hear. You know, that's not going away. That is real. I don't think it's great for our democracy that it's possible basically to go not just 24/7, but 365 days a year and never hear any news other than what you already believe, that just reinforces your opinion. That would make me crazy. I couldn't live in that, but a lot of people are very comfortable with that. They don't, for whatever set of reasons, they've made up their minds, and that is what they want to hear. And it has to be very tempting to be in a situation like that.
I suspect it is. And I worry about any politician who tries to take some moderate path is going to get primaried because they'll be marshaled, a lot of votes will be marshaled by some of these media that are pretty partial. It's a daunting situation. How do you walk the fine line of letting an interviewee follow a line of thought? And when do you break in to control the conversation?
Well, it depends on who it is and how long they're going. I mean, so much of what you don't see on television is that there is a time limit on these interviews. I mean, tonight we had so much big news today. I'm just using this as an example. We had the impeachment trial arguments were presented on both sides, on both the Democrat side and former President Trump's legal side. They both put those arguments. We reported on that. We reported on the immigration reform package that President Biden is rolling out. We reported on where they stand on COVID, these COVID relief talks. There was the Alexei Navalny trial in Russia, which we wanted to report on. There's more to do, which we did tonight, on what to do about K through 12 schools and when are they going to open up for in-person learning. So many tough questions around the pandemic, about the vaccine. So we were trying to cram 500 pounds into a 400-pound show, and it was challenging tonight. I mean, I ended up having 5 minutes, Rhett, to interview Jared Bernstein, who's one of President Biden's economic advisors, and it felt like 1 minute because he had things he wanted to say, and I knew we only had 5 minutes. The lesson I learned from Jim Lehrer and Robin McNeil, which I cherish, is that what matters is you let people finish their thought. It's better not to interrupt constantly, that if people want to watch interruption, argument, they should go to another news program. So we try to let people finish their thought, but it can be challenging. If an answer is going really long, what I could do when I was with people in person is I could glare at them or give them the evil eye
right
across the table, or I could even put my arm, out on the desk or the table, as if you got to stop. I wouldn't go like this, but now that everybody is at home or on the White House lawn or somewhere else, and they're looking into a little hole in their computer, a light, they can't see me. They don't know that I'm frantically trying to get them to be quiet. So it's a trick, and I hardly have perfected it. Let me put it this way, I'm still working on how to politely interrupt people. I try to wait until they at least have taken a breath, but some politicians are really good at never taking a breath. Right. They've taken media training, and they know how to talk.
I had to smile. I asked Jerry Krentz, who works in our communications staff, any advice, and her advice was just let her finish her comments and don't interrupt her. I think she was suggesting that would be contrary to our normal style.
No, you get a pass. You get to interrupt. I should have told you that at the outset.
Not at all. Notwithstanding your inauspicious introduction to the business world in Atlanta with the comment, what are the most significant challenges you face today as a woman today? What are those challenges today?
I think, frankly, this is a good period for women in journalism. I can hardly believe I'm saying that, but I do think, the contrast, Rhett, between today and 1968, when I graduated from Duke and when I came to Atlanta to interview, and then 2 years later when I interviewed for the reporter job, and 5 years after that when I interviewed with NBC when they had very few women. It's just it's day and night. Of course, somebody said to me years ago, it was a year, maybe 10 or so years ago, when the number of local women anchors was equal to the number of men local anchors. Somebody pointed out, well, it usually looks like a man and his second wife, because men were allowed to grow old and, with all due respect, to have gray hair, whereas women were not allowed to do that. That was not considered a smart move. So we're smiling because we know what I'm talking about. Did I dream that I would still be doing journalism this many decades into my career? Some kind of journalism, yes. Did I dream that I would be anchoring? Absolutely not. So we have come a very long way. I mean, look around. I mean, the fact that Gwen Ifill and I were named the first 2 women co-anchors, a Black woman and a white woman in the United States of America in 2013. It was really quite extraordinary. And by the way, I miss Gwen every single day. She was a light and an inspiration to all of us who knew her. But we've come a very long way, but we still have a way to go, Rhett. We need to do much better with minorities, with people of color, on camera and in management. And we in journalism, I know, are working on that, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, I can appreciate that. I think we have a long way to go in a lot of things. And I think we have to always take encouragement where we have made progress. And it sounds like you're striking the right balance in that regard. Now, another question, and I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Democracy requires free press. Doesn't it also require shared platforms of information?
Explain what that means.
Yeah, I'm
shared
afraid
platforms
that-
of information, meaning, is that open?
I'm not sure what that means. I know who submitted it. We could ask him, but I don't want to put him on the spot. Maybe,
We'll let them add an explanatory note.
yeah, that'd be helpful. One last, let me see. How did your college experience motivate your future career? We talked some about that in terms of the mentor, the people who kind of gave you suggestions and steered you in certain directions. You did do the DC internship, and I know you were told don't go back because it's not an opportunity for women. But did it whet your appetite in any way to go back eventually in a different way?
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. It was being in Washington just that first summer, the summer between Meredith and Duke, the summer of 1965 was magical for me. It was when I just fell in love with, I was already really interested in politics and then fell in love with it. And then after I transferred to Duke, came back to Washington, and I told you the story of what happened. But it really, I mean, I have to say, we all talk about favorite professors, but I have to give a shout out. The classes I sat in at Duke, as I look back on it, I think, why didn't I stay longer? Why didn't I I was trying so hard to cram all my major credits into 2 years. And in retrospect, if we could have afforded it, I mean, I borrowed money, I had to pay back a loan to go to school. In retrospect, of course, I wish I'd stayed, an extra year or 2 and taken a whole lot more classes. But the professors I had, every single one of them left an impression on me. And it's true to this day. And that's why faculty, these faculty decisions are so important. Student, professor, student teacher relationships, so important, which is why, coming back to this pandemic and what's happened, K through 12, children out of the classroom, and then at the higher education, higher ed level with colleges experimenting with this and that and the other and how to teach in this new virtual world. These decisions are so important, and why I absolutely believe we've got to get kids back in the classroom. We've got to get young people back in the classroom in front of their teachers. But I don't want to diminish, Rhett, what we've learned, because we now know that students can learn a lot, especially older students can learn a lot virtually. And I know I am in awe of the professors who've worked so hard this year to share, to do their job, but to do it on a piece of machinery, a computer sitting in front of them, rather than being able to interact with human beings.
Right. So I do have clarification. Instead of shared platform, doesn't everyone have to have the same? It gets back to, don't we have to have the same facts? I think was, of course we depend on democracy, depends on free press, but if we all can just make up our facts, It doesn't seem-
Absolutely. And I worry so much about that because I think we now have our own set of beliefs. And if you watch or listen or read to one news source and never hear or read the other argument, how do you grow? How do you learn? How do you challenge yourself if you don't hear, the arguments on the other side? And if you don't, frankly, understand what the basics are, and that's what we're losing right now. When I'm going to come back to the same thing. If we can't even agree on the numbers in an election, what was real and what wasn't, and then there, as you all know, these conspiracy theories that are growing, that have grown, that are much more abroad in the land than they were 10 years ago or so. We've got a lot of work to do in this country, and that's why our education system is so important.
Thank you. We need to end on that. I want to say before I turn it back to Sterlie, just quickly, I know I speak for everyone when I say thank you. Truly, what a fascinating life you have lived, and you've made enormous contributions to your profession. And I personally believe with all my heart that a free and independent press is the cornerstone of our democracy, and your commitment to excellence over the years is a shining example. So thank you for that. And we are proud to call you a Dookie. So thank you so much. Sterlie, I'm sorry I ran over.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to you. And Judy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhett. Thank you, Rhett. Thank you for making time to do this.
I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you both, and good evening, everyone. My name is Sterlie Wilder, and I am a proud member of the class of 1983 and the Associate Vice President of Alumni Affairs. And thank you so much to our incredible speakers, Judy Woodruff, of course, and Brett Mabry. Judy, we've tried to have you for years, so we're so delighted that you were able to join us this evening. And just a terrific conversation and program, and another fantastic Blue Devil dinner in Charlotte. 8 years of a wonderful and a really special Duke Charlotte tradition. We know that you are zoomed out after these past 10 months, but yet you continue to show up in record numbers for Duke events, regionally as well as our national programs. And we couldn't be more proud of the extraordinary engagement of our alumni during the pandemic, and are so excited to think of what this means for the future when we're able to meet in person again. We know that while nothing can replace being together, we now know that we can reach so many more alumni through virtual programming, and that a mixture of online and in person will become a permanent part of our future events. So I want to give special thanks tonight, in addition to our speakers, who were to John Leip and the Duke Charlotte volunteers who helped plan and promote this evening, as well as host the breakout rooms. I'd love to call your attention to Duke Day, which is a virtual pep rally set for this Saturday, February 6th, as the Blue Devils take on the Tar Heels, and the first of what we hope will be 2 matchups for men's basketball. Hopefully you have read your emails earlier this week from us regarding the Forever Learning Institute, which is an incredible and unprecedented series of educational opportunities available this spring, and more on both of these, as well as other programs, in our follow-up email to tonight's event. And for those Trinity, Women's College, Pratt, and Nursing undergraduate alumni who have class years ending in 1 and 6 and 0 and 5, we have just announced virtual reunions for April. And while we know it is a huge disappointment not to have reunions in person, we do have some pretty cool programs planned, and we really hope that we will be able to have some classes celebrate in person on campus when it is safe and we are able. So thanks once again to our terrific panelists and speakers, a wonderful program tonight. We hope that we will see you soon on campus and be able to welcome you back home. And until then, thanks again so much for joining us. Be safe, be well, and of course, be forever Duke. Take care. Good evening.